Hey, good day, FCF. We're continuing our journey through the book of Ephesians. We left off at Ephesians 5:17. Now, we're going to take a turn in this information, and once we get into verse 21 in particular, Ephesians 5:21, all the way through Ephesians 6, verse 9, a whole different topic is brought up, and we'll get to that as we go. But let's pick up. So, our context. Verse 15, Ephesians 5:15, be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. All right, pick up in verse 18. Actually, since I read that much, let me read 17. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is. Now we're starting today, verse 18 and 19. Do not get drunk on wine, which leads to debauchery. Instead, be filled with the Spirit. Speak to one another with psalms and hymns and spiritual songs. Sing and make music in your hearts to the Lord. All right, we'll stop there. So he introduces this concept. He says, don't be drunk with wine, which brings debauchery, the idea of, consequences in one's lives, broken character, and all those kinds of things. He says, but rather be filled with the Spirit. Well, what does it mean to be filled with the Spirit? The easiest way for us to understand what the Spirit of God's trying to communicate to us here is to compare what happens to a person's mind when they are actually drunk with wine. Now, of course, none of you that are watching this would ever have that experience on your own, but take it from somebody that does. Here's what happens. When you're drunk on anything, whether it's alcohol or a drug, your mind, your perspective, your way of thinking, your way of reacting, your way of feeling is altered. It's still you're still in there, but yet it's not the same you. Everything you view in life is affected by this altered state of context. In this case, it's a chemically imposed thing. So when you apply that to being filled with the Spirit, it's helpful because it means that I'm going to walk through life with an altered state of consciousness or an altered perspective, but it's going to be the perspective of God. I'm going to, and Christ, of course, is always where we want to go. I'm going to see things the way Christ did. I'm going to respond to things the way Christ did. I'm going to have the eternal viewpoint the way Christ did. I'm going to be thinking about the preeminence of the purposes of God and the plans of God and His promises and His processes and all these different things. They're going to be governing my mind. They're going to be governing my outlook. And when that's what's governing my outlook, my responses to everything and everyone are different. I'm living life, in other words, to be filled with the Spirit is I'm living life from this elevated standpoint where I'm kind of living from a heavenly perspective. In fact, in the book of Colossians, which is parallel to Ephesians, they're very comparable. Chapter 3, verse 1, it says it like this. Colossians 3, verse 1, or actually I'll start with verse 2. It says, set your minds on things above, not on earthly things. So that's the idea of being Spirit-filled. I'm thinking from the heavenly, eternal vantage point. And Christ, of course, gives me the picture of what that is like. So connected with that, then he says, speaking to one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs. Now, this can be looked at as two ways. This is a natural byproduct of being filled or under the influence of the Holy Spirit, and that's what it means to be filled with the Holy Spirit. I'm under the influence of the Spirit. I'm thinking the way He thinks. I'm seeing the way He sees from the eternal perspective. So to have these truths about God and life going through our minds in a spontaneous, joyful way, psalms, hymns, spiritual songs, that would be a common result of us being under the influence of the Spirit of God. But it's also a way to maintain that fullness or that influence of the Spirit. In the early days, there were not books easily, readily available, so often Christians would write down concepts that they learned, biblical concepts or teachings of the apostles, and they would put them into song because that way it's easy to remember. Well, likewise for us, one of the ways to maintain the Spirit's influence in our minds is to have godly themes going through our heads, and music is a great tool for that. So I want to emphasize that maintaining the influence of the Spirit, keeping ourselves under the influence of the Spirit, speaking to one another and in our hearts to the Lord, psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, it's a great way. Now, mind you, when we communicate with each other with this godly frame of mind, this elevated frame of mind, that also helps other people to regain the influence of the Spirit over their minds. We've all had the experience, for example, that, okay, so you're in church, and God feels so close that you can reach out and touch him, and it sounds to our souls like he's speaking directly to us, and is. But then we know you get out in the parking lot and you might get in a traffic jam or something, and we can lose that frame of mind. So we were intensely under the influence of the Spirit, or filled with the Spirit, let's say in the church service, and I'm just using that as an easy example. But then things distract us and we lose that fullness of the Spirit. In the original language, that Ephesians 5:18, it literally says, be being filled with the Holy Spirit. It's a continuous action thing. We can be fully under the Holy Spirit's influence, and then we can lose it through, just everyday distractions that are innocent. Maybe we do something physical for our work, and so it requires our absolute concentration. Now, you can cultivate a dual awareness, the awareness of the presence of God, even as you're doing everything you do, and that's part of spiritual growth and maturity. But that intense fullness of the Spirit of God, when we're under the influence of God, we're seeing things from that eternal vantage point, we're heavenly minded, that can be lost just through daily distractions. And so one of the ways that we can recover that is perhaps, again, through Christian music, godly music, as well as conversations with other believers. And so these things can restir that influence of the Spirit of God in our hearts and minds again. All right, I'll stop there. We'll pick this theme up tomorrow. Thank you.